I've got one big question I cannot seem to figure out the answer to. Why is Final Fantasy 16 so boring? Now, listen, I know I'm not a typical Final Fantasy player. When I first started out in games journalism way back in the late 90s, that was when the original Final Fantasy VII came out. So, I've been on board for a long time. I wasn't even particularly planning on playing Final Fantasy 16. There's a lot of other stuff coming out pretty soon I'm very interested in. Starfield, Baldur's Gate 3. I spent a lot of time playing the Marvel Midnight Suns game, a few other things. But I was sitting around looking for something interesting to do game-wise, and I played the Final Fantasy 16 demo, and I thought, wow, this is a really great demo. And I usually don't get a game just based on the demo, but it was so good, and the pacing was so great and everything else. I said, you know what? That's it. I'm just going to go all in. This will be my game for the next month or so while I wait for something else I want to play to come out. So I will give the game credit. It's done a good job of absorbing some of that Game of Thrones influence, putting it into a Final Fantasy context. Graphics look good. The switch over to more action-oriented gameplay versus turn-based battles, it's fine. I'm more of a turn-based guy anyway, but I thought this was a very well-done way to do the real-time fighting, and I didn't have any problem with it. But what happened after the first couple of hours is the game just seemed to crawl to a halt. Is a lot of sitting around talking to people. I know Final Fantasy games are all about long dialogue scenes and conversations and the relationships between characters. I generally love all that stuff. However, in this particular case, every time I could sense a big dialogue scene, a big cutscene coming up, I would take out my phone and start scrolling through Twitter or something while I waited for it to finish, just kind of half listening out of one side of my ear. Sometimes you could skip forward in these conversations, sometimes you couldn't. You could generally tell by whether it was done in the in-game engine or was more pre-rendered, whether or not you'd be able to zip through a scene a little bit faster. When it comes to game dialogue, I think a lot of people have not learned what filmmakers learned years and years ago, which is to speed up scenes where there's dialogue between characters. There was a famous director, maybe it was Howard Hawks, who used to have the actors run through a scene, and he'd time how long it would take for everyone to deliver their lines, especially if they were having a dialogue scene. And then he'd say, okay, now cut a little bit of the time off of that, artificially speed it up a little bit, maybe by 25% or so. And when you're on set, it's going to sound like you're talking kind of fast, really fast like that. But when you play it back, it actually sounds very realistic. And that's what I think a lot of video games have not mastered. They're still doing all of the dialogue in real time as if you're really speaking it, not understanding that looking at something on the screen, you actually want a little bit of that artificial speed up in order to make it feel more natural. Now, that's just one of the ways in which Final Fantasy XVI was just incredibly boring. I mean, frankly, 90% of the game so far seems to be pointless side quests, and not interesting ones, not ones with interesting storylines or characters. It's just, oh, I left my package over there. Go pick it up for me and fight off some hornets while you're doing it. Okay, so you go do that, then you bring it back to where the guy was, or somebody's like, oh, take package A and deliver it to person B. I made 3 different parcels of food. You have to go deliver them to these 3 people who are, maybe 50 feet away each. It's not even like a whole big deal to go do it, but you have to take the time to do it. Here's package 1, here's package 2, here's package 3, a little dialogue each time. Then I have to go back and tell the guy that I did it. A little return receipt requested action there. I feel like not being a completionist, I don't have to do every side mission, I don't have to collect everything, I don't have to level up every stat. Even with that in mind, I felt like the game was 75% fairly pointless side quests and side conversations and uninteresting, just random NPC-style characters, and 25% actual story. And, that story just, you have to drag yourself through a lot of stuff to get to anything happening there. My God. And of course, the open world is not really all that open at all. It's still pretty on rails, and a lot of the combat feels repetitive, even if you switch up your powers and your skills and, the rings that you wear to give you different bonuses. It's still a little button mashy. It's still kind of doing the same thing over and over again. Every once in a while, you'd run into a bigger monster, and that was kind of interesting, but it didn't happen that often. It was usually, the same couple of monsters over and over again while you're just walking through an empty field field without much else going on, trying to get to point B. So maybe you can have an unskippable conversation with someone who's a little bit more interesting than the last person you had an unskippable conversation with. Now, I'm not saying Final Fantasy XVI is a bad game. Clearly, a lot of care and a lot of expertise went into it, and I very often like stuff like this. But man, does it feel like there's an awful lot of filler material shoved in there to, make it feel like a bigger, longer, more expansive game when it's really a couple of hub places and a couple of merchants at each one and a couple of quests usually involving delivering packages of food or looking for a missing letter or something like that. And then very occasionally you get back to the main story, which is pretty interesting when you can actually find it. I don't think I'm asking for too much in 2023, where everyone's brains are just constantly bombarded with entertainment and input and stimulus, to have a game be, a little more challenging, to throw a little more at you, to be a little more spontaneous. Not this kind of slow plotting version that we have here, where everything looks great and frankly plays great, but man, you were just sitting around waiting for people to stop talking or stop giving you packages to deliver. And again, I'm not the world's biggest Final Fantasy fan. I've played plenty of the other games, liked a lot of them. There's just something about 16 that, man, feels slow as hell. Now, I wonder if I'm going to feel the same way playing, let's say, Starfield or Baldur's Gate 3. Maybe I'm just looking for, too much too fast and don't have the patience anymore to sit through a dialogue-heavy game. I don't think that's the case, but in a couple months, I'll be able to find out.